Okay, welcome to the final panel of the Sedai conference here, AutoCon 2022. My name is Dean Nelson. I've been in the digital infrastructure industry here in the Bay Area for 32 years now, which is kind of crazy. Feeling kind of old. But I was at Sun Microsystems, I was at eBay and PayPal, and then also went over to Uber and did 30 years of the operational side of that. Went up into the other side, started doing investments and consulting and other things. And right now I'm the CEO of a company called Cato, and we're doing a lot of stuff with Autonomous as well. And so I've been working a bit here with Suresh on Sedai, and I've been enamored with what you guys have actually put together. And so this panel is really interesting for me because we've got people up here that have real experience. So first off, people have rolled this back out, running big infrastructure systems when it comes down to deploying autonomous infrastructure. And what I wanted to do is just make a few statements around what I believe is changed in this. And if you think about it, over the last 30 plus years, we built infrastructure. There was just a panel that discussed about the differences between the changes that have happened between monolithic systems and going back into Kubernetes and truly going to a serverless environment that allows you to have this flexibility and take advantage of all these tools. And what we're talking about now is how autonomous systems can help in this, of course, and why automation isn't enough. The business case around what we're trying to do. And from my perspective, what's interesting here is that I believe that autonomy can actually negate the trade-offs that we've had to make in the past. And what I mean with that is, you remember the old adage around you can either have good, fast, or cheap, two of the three? It can be good and fast, but it's not going to be cheap. It can be cheap and fast, but it's not going to be very good. We always had to make those trade-offs because in some point you were making an investment choice or a business choice or go-to-market choice or something that you had to make a trade-off to say that, okay, I'm going to have to sacrifice this to get this one. What's different today is that because of the technology and what we're doing with autonomy itself, Sedai is not making you make that trade-off. You're going to get a performance increase. You're going to be able to have the actual availability, maintaining it or increasing it, and you're going to be able to maintain or reduce your costs. So we're not making a trade-off anywhere inside of that, which is very different than the way it was before. I just remember I ran a lot of underlying infrastructure, and inside of that, we'd always say, okay, well, I wish I could do that. If we re-platform, we could do it. But my God, it's 3 years worth of work and all this investment. Are we really going to get a return on that? And so when you make those trade-offs, you have to make the business call. So from this business case standpoint, autonomy makes perfect sense from my perspective. So just putting that out there first. As we start to talk about it now, we've got folks on here who have had operational experience and also from the investment side, Matt. So what you're doing, investing in autonomous type technologies themselves. So what I wanted to do is start with a few questions. I'm going to just go down the line here, and I think Prakash, sorry, not Prakash. Yes, is joining us from India. We'll see if we can get through the technical challenges there. But I'm going to start with you, Kira. So you're the Chief Innovation Officer over at RingCentral, yes?
That's right.
And I just heard that you've been there for 10 years.
That's accurate.
You hit double digits. Okay, all right. This is not a new concept for you. You're actually applying this technology at your company. And innovation, of course, in your job is a top priority at the company itself. But presumably freeing up the resources for the teams from these toil activities is a big deal. I was assuming for production. Yeah. Okay. So how do you actually think about that from when it comes to RingCentral and the people spending time? Give us some examples around that.
Well, look, like any company, RingCentral's, my job as a Chief Innovation Officer is to invest in people who are working on innovation. That means bringing value to our customers. And what the customer sees at the end is the end result, the product, and that is what creates value. The fact that behind it there's a lot of people making all of that happen is not something that you want to expose to customers and not something that you get paid for, right? That all becomes sort of overhead. So if I can get my people to focus more on innovation, more on development, more on thinking strategically, more on worrying less about what are they deploying and how fast are they deploying and what's it going to cost them, that's a big win. And ultimately, the investment in innovation will translate into value to customers. So for me, being able to do anything that removes any kind of manual overhead and reduces cost and increases reliability, which is incredibly important for a company like RingCentral, where we operate at 5 nines availability, which means that there's virtually no downtime at all. It's a big deal.
Yeah, I think 34 seconds a year is the amount of time you can have with that 5.9. Have you heard of this thing called FCI? Sorry, I had to throw that back out there. Failed customer interactions. All right,
Yeah.
we got new metrics that are actually going to improve that. But as a provider of that real-time network, you can't afford those drop calls, as you were saying. So how do you think about the use of autonomous systems like this to improve that performance and reliability? How is it actually helping today? Give us some examples of that.
So with autonomous system, what I can do is A, reduce the number of people. That's one. B, I can have an effect of it is being a more reliable system, just by sheer, value of the fact that there are fewer people on it, because people are the ones who are actually more often than not are the ones who are causing problems. So when there is in any kind of service interruption, it usually kind of goes back more so than ever before to a human being, because systems by themselves, hardware is more reliable, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so those two things is what enables then us to invest. And so the way that I'm thinking about this is by deploying autonomous, essentially taking people off, providing better availability, and of course reducing costs, because that's obviously top of mind for everybody. It's a win-win-win. And frankly, if anyone who's ever seen a Sedai demo, you kind of go thinking you're like in science fiction.
It does seem like little magic
Exactly.
gremlins
Yeah.
behind there
Yeah. Right.
doing their thing. Yeah.
Exactly. I can tell you when my team was watching the demo, and they're skeptics, and they're like, "Oh, here goes Kira was again one of her startups, and I'm going to have to put an hour, and then I'm going to have to look at something else, and my God, it's like a drag on my time, but I can't say no, so I got to sit in this meeting, and then I have to do all this work." They were like, the disbelievers, the skeptics were like, "Yeah, we want to try it."
Because there must have been value immediately they saw for their own toil and their own headaches that they got to deal with, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, let's shift that a little bit into developer productivity, or just overall productivity itself. How is, I guess, the application of this help with that goal overall? Just from those two perspectives, developer productivity, SRE productivity.
Well, they go hand in hand, developer productivity and SRE productivity, because somebody's going to have to deploy systems, and somebody has to watch these systems, and somebody has to bring them up, bring them down, watch the cost, etc. Really, in today's world, developer and SREs are almost interchangeable, right? You really don't want a separate SRE organization. You really want your developers to be able to deploy right into production. And so with autonomous system, you essentially alleviate their jobs. They're taking out a lot of this labor-intensive work that they have to do, that they have to be trained on, that developers hate doing, because they would much rather than like somebody in SRE group did the work. But their SREs are really now merged. And so it creates just better, overall better team productivity and higher quality.
Excellent. Sounds like you're making no trade-offs by applying this.
Exactly. Amazing.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Kira. I'm going to shift to Matt. And Matt, you've got a totally different perspective. So you're not running an infrastructure team or running this and rolling these out, but you're investing in these technologies. So you've made conscious choices to go back and throw a lot of money into companies like Sedai and others that would be able to deliver this future. Why? What do you believe in? What do you see? What are the patterns that we that are not investors actually don't see?
Well, I've had a number of investments where I've looked at in AI and ML of having this autonomous brain on top of something. And it's really interesting. I started investing in robotics probably about 7 years ago when I learned there are no robots building iPhones. And so you're building 270 million devices. You think it'd be ideal for a robot. I mean, you do 270 million to something, why not? But Apple is always trying to change the recipe a bit. And so led me down a path of several investments in there. And basically, as I said early on, people just overconsumed. People are just so busy, and people have been asked to do more and more with less. And so, like for example, one of the largest berry manufacturer people who grow berries, blueberries, about 15% of the berries go unpicked every year. And so I started seeing this trend in IT now because people are so busy, and it's hard to find human beings to do a lot of the tasks right now. So when I met Sedai, I also felt let me back up. Historically, robotics have had a very poor ROI because when you take a low cost labor and try and make it even low margin, it's hard to take something low margin, make it even lower margin. And so an ROI has to be really solid. With Sedai, the ROI is very measurable, and that's important because CFOs are rationalizing everything, especially in a tough economy right now. So anything with automation has to have a hard ROI, and also it has to be collaborative because the organism will reject something that comes in. I mean, the top-down selling just doesn't work, so it has to be embraced by the doers. And so I think the collaborative part is very important. So I look for that in all the investments.
Gotcha. That kind of ties back to what Kira was saying, that when the engineers saw it, it was like, that can be useful to me. Right. And so immediate adoption, you get champions internally, and you start to move things forward.
I think every great technology, if you look at trends, a lot of times they help elevate people's careers. If you look at the history of networking and CRM, it elevates people because the ROI can be impactful. I think this is kind of the next way that we're going to see in innovation is and as somebody else said early on, there's a big difference between automation and autonomy. And so I think you're going to see a whole bunch of new leaders evolve inside of IT. It's going to elevate people because it's going to need an evolving skill set.
That reminds me of you and I have lived through outages and challenges and other things. I don't know if you remember the latest outage from Facebook that happened, I think, earlier this year, where there was a multi-day impact. And that was automation going wild. What it worked out to be is there was a rollout of a network change, and it cascaded. And the automation was so fast, it rolled across the entire portfolio. And they lost access to everything. So there was this impact that it took them days to actually go drive to data centers to actually fix things. And so when you think about automation, and you were talking about this earlier, this process of taking something and automating it will be basically defunct or useless pretty quickly. And so the autonomy aspects of being able to say, I'm going to deploy something, watch it, I'm going to learn, and I'm going to adjust and do it. That's the whole point of autonomy versus the automation aspects. And I think that you raised an important thing here. We're about, we're in a downturn right now. It's a very challenging economic time, and we hope it doesn't go into a recession. But in the end of it, everybody's looking for a cost reduction. But if you look at the performance indicators, we talk about cost, performance, and availability. From the cost standpoint, this doesn't necessarily go back and cut your cloud bill. This allows your actual deployments to get more done with the same amount or a slightly less amount. So you're getting a result out of that for the business, whether it's going to be you gave a perfect analogy of that, the 7-Eleven one. I've never heard that before. The fact that you can say one customer gives you 7 new ones when they have a good experience, and then one bad gives you 11 customers you lost. If you can improve that performance, the latency aspects and all those, here we go again with some pretty important impacts to the business itself. And as you just said, if there's legacy built here where somebody can say, the value proposition I am bringing to you is to increase the performance of the business, not lower the costs, not reduce headcount, not what the other metrics we used to care about. Now it truly is about how do we help the customer experience be better? How do we actually help the business grow? And that's where this kind of deployment suddenly can make a change that I don't think really existed before. And why? It's because it's applying new technology and autonomy to make that stuff just operate better. So another question for you, Matt, around this one. The business case, I think it might have helped outline it for you. But what would the enterprises be looking for when they are trying to adopt the autonomy with Sedai?
Well, I think one of the things I look for, if you look at it as a contrast, security. Security is a fear, uncertainty, doubt sale. And sometimes you'll see startups where you need a very complicated spreadsheet to convey the ROI. I don't know if anybody's ever purchased solar, for example. Very complicated, spreadsheet. What's the inflation? What's electricity going like? What's your usage and that type of stuff. I think anytime you have to roll out a spreadsheet for an ROI, I think it's very difficult. And so, for example, in some robotics, you just look at the pick rate. It's a hard ROI. I think the key for us is I think the key in autonomy is measure. It could be operations, deflections. It used to be IOPS and storage. And I think it's key. And it's something with Sedai that attracted me was a very simple ROI where the customer can understand it. They can build trust with the sales force because they don't need a fancy spreadsheet with all kinds of macros that are locked down. And so I think the ROI is very important. And I think that the reality is that, how often do you purchase something that you get what you expected? So I think it's anytime you have a slick marketing program or a slick ROI, I think already it makes things challenging for the customer and the sales force.
Got it. Yeah, it almost is a no-brainer when you start to see things like when you can have a no-brainer sale, you just get adoption. Right. It just makes it easy. Yes, I want that. I can make this thing happen. If it becomes complex, the headaches of trying to go back and justify it, it just gets lost throughout all those. Okay, so we've got a substitute here today. Prakash was not able to join us today for this panel, but you've got a pretty good insight into Fabric.
Yep.
So Suresh, of course, thank you for jumping up here. I'm going to ask you a few questions I was going to ask Prakash as well. Before I ask your opinion on something, I want to know about the ROI of an autonomous system that you saw in the last 2 years. And they're 100% Sedai coverage. Is this correct?
That is right.
Okay. So tell us about the ROI.
Yeah. In fact, I'm now representing 3 customers: Fabric, Belcorp, and Freshworks. Satvik is in?
Freshworks, we will try. We will take in shots of your.
Okay, then I'll remove Freshworks out and I'll talk about these two. On Freshworks, on Fabric, the current run rate is 180K operations every year, 180,000 operations. If you take the number of incidents per operation, the best case would be 99.99, but we haven't caused a single incident. So that's the beauty, because the key here is autonomous systems picks the operations that they are super good at. They know that there won't be an impact. They know what is expected. They always learn, which means there are a set of operations that are extremely good or extremely good candidates for autonomous systems. That is the main key aspect for Fabric. The second, it was scale up, scale down. In fact, anticipating a timeout and fixing it, those are the set of operations. Now for Belcorp, they saw 75% reduction in latency. So it is 790 lambdas, and we could almost operate on all of them. They have a large SRE team. The biggest problem is scaling up and down becomes a very boring operation for a good SRE. If you ask them, send an Excel saying, scale this up and see if it's better, scale this down and see if it's bad. At one point, they'll say, you know what, this is not what I signed up for. Right? This is exactly not what they signed up for. If an autonomous system can take your job away, in my mind, you didn't have a job in the first place. It's hard. It's extremely hard to replace humans. It is impossible to do that. You can only replace toil. What you replace is not human job. What you replace is really the busy job from humans, the scale ups, the scale downs, the restarts, the replaces. That's exactly what Fabric and Belcorp both saw. That's why we get support from that SRE. They want us there. They want that autonomous buddy sitting right next to them, and that takes the blame. It takes 100% ownership. We file the tickets, and there won't be a case where SREs will have to stand up and answer why Sedai did this. That answer will be given by Sedai itself with the explainability right there.
So if I'm hearing this correctly, 75% reduction in latency?
That's right.
Okay, which had direct correlation back into performance and revenue.
That's right.
Okay, and then I believe at Fabric there was a 48% reduction in latency as well.
That is right too.
Okay, 6.7x something. And,
Exactly.
But these numbers again, if I remember how I read that case, they turned on Sedai, and then it just started performing.
Correct.
And there was a quote I think that was, did something change? Our things are performing better. Did Sedai do something? I think that was the sentence.
In fact, it is a real quote. So the customer called Fabric VP of Eng and told her that there is something changed in your shopping cart. It's working so way better. So did you release something? So she called me up and said, you know what? The only thing I could see is you filing some change tickets. So I want to see if you guys did something right. So I went into the system and said, yes, it was us. So that is the deal, right? So these are the things that will be hard for humans to find. It's boring. It's not interesting for any SRE. If you hire a good SRE, he will, if you look at the retention rate for Fabric, right? Not one SRE left the company, right? They have this, I work with the same SRE. I haven't received a SRE bye-bye email. I receive that all the time at PayPal. I used to manage one of the largest SRE teams. They get bored very quickly, right? So that is what SREs have signed up for. It's just that we are underestimating what they can do. They can do a lot better than what they're doing today. You should not ask them to configure your Kubernetes cluster. Kubernetes' job is to make the cluster happy. SRE's job is to make your customers happy. It's a big difference. Your cluster may be okay. It may not be overburning anything, but your customers may be facing a latency. That's the difference. That's what we are trying to fix.
So many things I want to talk about in that, but let me shift to a different one. For Fabric itself, there was a seasonability thing that they had to work out specifically. So when they rolled this out, I mean, safety.
Yes.
You know, was there any incidents that were actually caused by Sedai in production?
None. So we haven't caused a single incident so far. The key here is there is something called intrinsic safety, right? So there are operations that you can make safer by adding checks and balances. There are operations that will be safer just because you are taking it away from humans. For example, pedestrian avoidance, right? Pedestrian collision avoidance is a technique that got Tesla the first place in safety because that system is a lot better than humans watching it. It can spot a pedestrian, it can drive you away from it. The lead time is probably 3 seconds. I think that is the read time on 90 miles. So that is what we did. It's not really the safety measures. We take this inherently safe operations and add safety measures to it.
Got it. Yeah, something I remember when I was at Uber, we had 3,500 microservices. Okay, that sounded like a lot back then. I just heard earlier today 10,000 microservices from somebody.
If Satvik comes online, you will hear 32,000 microservices.
32,000 micro. I mean,
Yeah.
this just gets to the point where it is absolutely unmanageable. A human, a system, the automation just can't keep track of everything that's going on within these systems themselves.
Yeah, you need to have a
that's
good recruiting solution. So your SREs, if they leave, you can still recruit good SREs back in. That's one thing you need if you were to manage 30 to give with people. Second, you should be able to tolerate incidents because at one point people get tired and bored and there will be incidents. So.
Okay, so we need to basically adapt to newer technology that's going to allow us to scale, not people, but capabilities that more maximizes the talent we have, if I'm understanding this correctly.
Yes.
From an SRE standpoint, this is not about replacing people. This is about augmenting the capabilities to remove the toil and help them scale.
Correct.
And help that tie to the business from a previous conversation about What are you doing today that's actually making the customer experience better?
Yeah. You can help them in two different ways. You can bring a set of screens in front of them. That is exactly what APMs and tools and monitoring does. Bring a set of tools. The decision still lies with them. The rule is theirs. The execution is also theirs. You still have a set of screens that will help do it. Or you can recruit an autonomous buddy who sits right next to them and looks at the monitor and acts on their behalf. That is where you have a front warrior for them. That's when you're really, really helping them, right?
Got it. So what exactly does the person sitting next to me called Sedai look like? Is that?
We have started calling it autonomous buddy.
Autonomous buddy, I like that. Okay. So I'd like to ask you a question about performance and really value to the business. Have you seen specific numbers within your rollouts that have helped RingCentral's actual performance with the customers? Because I know you talked about availability, but just overall, like engagement or other things that are happening because of the deployments.
It's harder for me to translate it to engagement with our customers because what they're seeing is an interface that basically it's a phone call, it's a video meeting, it's some sort of collaboration via messaging. That's what they're seeing. So to them, to customers, like we said earlier, a dropped call is like that's lost revenue. For some, it's a patient that is unhappy. It's a client that just slams the phone and says that, my lawyer's system just doesn't work, right? These are things that are real, and any type of service interruption, which happen because of people, most than not, are basically really, really bad. That's the impact. So we drive to have absence of that. And then the people behind it are the people who make it happen. And they make it happen. Like we had to put, years ago, a lot of automation in. We wouldn't be able to run at 5 nines. That means like no downtime. So we wouldn't be able to happen that without automation. So that was kind of the first cycle. And then the next cycle is beyond automation. And beyond automation, 10,000 microservices, 30,000 microservices. We run a global footprint of all over the world of billions of human interactions between humans, right? So for them, they don't care what's behind it, how many microservices behind it. They only care about the quality, and the quality comes both just the pure availability and then just the quality of voice or the quality of video or how fast does the message get to me, right? So this just went dead. Thanks. So what that means is that if you can get to that, and you won't get there fully, it'll be a step function through autonomous learning, then you've essentially created an opportunity for us to do more, right? And for us to do more means that we can load more services, we can more value, because the systems are now orchestrated in a way that humans are not in the way. And if you kind of second what Suresh said and what Matt said, you're elevating what humans are now doing, right? And they feel better about themselves. So I don't know. That was a long-winded answer.
And if I just translate a little bit, if you think of the value proposition, we said cost, performance, and availability. In priority order for you, I would assume it is availability, performance, cost. You don't
Absolutely right.
Okay. All right. Cool. And the availability, because a drop call is done. It's gone.
It's gone. Yeah.
Okay. Performance. So that's latency. That's the performance of the call.
That's latency, right? Any kind of latency. Latency in a phone call. Mm-hmm. Latency in video. Latency in any type of message getting to you. Loading a file. All of that is latency.
Gotcha. Okay.
That's what the user sees.
Yep. Yeah. And I heard this a few years ago. Actually, it was from Sri Shivananda when we were. I used to work for Sri, which was really fun, as we both did, when we were at eBay Inc. And he said that slow is the new down? Because we had that whole conversation around availability and failed customer interactions. And so, yep, everything looks great because it's up, but they actually can't get anything done in the back end, right? Or the customer can't actually get something done. That's a pretty significant thing. So the performance aspects of this, if you can't measure the performance, the slow, you're not going to see the impacts of the customers. And if I go back to what Matt said before, if they have a bad experience, well, then 11 are going away. Why? Because it took forever to get it done, or I didn't get the performance, or every one of the videos was choppy. That type of thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So Matt, I wanted to ask you about the way this ties back into the financial side. Investors are looking for multipliers, are looking for ways in which the investment can actually can make a difference. But from the investment standpoint, what do you see in the autonomy aspects, Sedai as well, in this industry or the application of this? How much is out there? How much is to be gained, I guess? How much autonomy is there?
I'm not exactly sure of the question. Are you asking? Maybe you reframe the question.
Yeah. So think of today we've got. We had a whole bunch of automation, and then people are going to autonomy. Are we 10% there when it comes down to the market opportunity, the hunting ground when it comes down to companies? Do you have any data on that?
I don't have the data, but I mean, we've spent the last 30 years, you could say, with what we now call automation, where you've got preloaded rules and very much Boolean-like triggers. But there's really no intelligence on that, because you've got a set of rules, there's no flexibility, there's nothing really dynamic about it. It's not like a closed-end loop to it. And so in some ways, cache theory was an early setup of automation with some dynamic nature to it, or swap space or other things from an operating system standpoint. But I think now this is the next layer where we can save human beings now for more difficult tasks, and so I think this is the new wave. We're not seeing a lot of investments out there with pure automation. I mean, a lot of times, if you look at most companies, if you want to have something that's very general purpose, you have to have a consulting experience, and you have to have customization. And right away, time to value is very long, revenue recognition is very hard, and people want to get busy. I mean, if you think about it, no rational customer wants to buy from a startup. You almost have to have your head examined, right? I mean, and you have to really treat the customer very carefully, because somebody's putting their career on the line when they deploy early technology. So the ROI has to be good, time to value has to be quick. And right now, most automation platforms are very broad-based, general purpose, and time to value is very long. I'm not sure if I answered your question, but
yeah, I'm looking at this like I agree with you completely about the time value, especially right now. The promise of 4 years from now that I'm going to be able to have those returns in this economy from an investment standpoint is going to be difficult.
Yeah, and every CIO and every IT professional has a backlog of POCs just waiting to be deployed. It's so hard to cut through the chase to it.
And
I'll just interrupt. The very first question that I asked Suresh was, well, what's it going to take to set this thing up? Like, are we looking at like 6 months of setup? Because not interesting.
And you mentioned that before, that when the engineers saw that can help me, there's an immediate, okay, I want to go do something. That brings it up to the top of the stack. And I think right now, the way things are, lots of people are going to be looking for ways to go optimize, no matter what. So even just from the cost standpoint, I can scale this without having to hire more people. I can just augment the people I've got with applying this type of technology. So from a hunting ground standpoint, I mean, I look at like comparative to cloud itself. There is cloud native and there's cloud first, right? And there's a very big difference between those two things. And so if you think about what we're talking about, if you're truly cloud native, you've got serverless capabilities. You can truly take advantage of all these things very quickly, correct?
Yeah, it kind of reminds me, when you get into a nice car and you close the door, you hear the thunk in the door, and you go, I'm going to have a nice experience. I think we've gotten to the point now when you go to a website, when you have an experience, you hear the thunk in the device. You right away, you know you're in a good experience. I think in commerce today, the switching cost is so easy. With everything being online, you have to have the thunk in whatever you do. I think what Autonomy does is it maximizes the user experience. Again, back towards that 7-11 rule, because you have to have the thunk in whatever you do. I think that's the end result and the hard ROI that I think Autonomy can provide.
Yeah, it's a bright future. And so we're going to wrap up. And I want to just give each of you a minute just to give final thoughts about the conversation. Anything you want to share around this in the industry, the technology, or your business itself. So, Kira, why don't we start with you?
It seems we're very early in this autonomous ability to run our systems. And being that early, I think we haven't even truly tapped into the full value. We haven't scratched the full value, I would say, of what it can offer. And we talked about cost, we talked about performance, we talked about reliability. And then I think, Matt, you mentioned security. I would say that is a very, very big parameter of what autonomous systems will offer us, because at the end of the day, humans, as well-trained humans, will make mistakes. Rules are there to be broken, right? And any type of rules-based system is basically going to be subject to vulnerabilities. And so that, I think, is something that will probably emerge as another big value of autonomous systems, in addition to everything that we just went over.
Thanks, Kira. Matt?
Yeah, I think there are two things that come to mind. One is do no harm. And I think it's very important, because if you're going to have this brain and this engine running, you want to make sure you don't do any damage, because you have to build trust. And the other thing is, I think the word practical autonomy is important, because I personally don't think I'll be on Earth when there'll be a car with no steering wheel and nobody behind the steering wheel. I just think that's a tough engineering problem, because it's not practical. It's an n-squared issue, all the dynamic nature out there. And so I think you have to be practical in the expectations of what you can do, and you can't do any harm. You just have to, that has to be number one. I mean, it's like the old, two-phase commit or ACID, all these type old technology databases. You almost have to have that kind of mentality if you can do autonomy.
Suresh.
Yeah, first step, I think as Kira mentioned, generally operators, especially when they are doing busy work, they tend to make mistakes, and that's given, right? And autonomous systems are not really the next shiny thing that no one has tested, and we are going there. It is here from 2003, right? If you look at companies like PayPal, eBay, Google, Facebook, they all have autonomous systems running. That's what is powering the systems. So the key here is, I think there are autonomous systems in all our companies. It's just that we are not tapping into them enough, and we are not finding the right use cases. So it's the most important aspect for all of us to be running a successful company with operational excellence, is the fact if we can divide operations into two and leave the first to an autonomous system, be it a system that you buy. If you're building one, we'll be more than happy to support you. But you have to help your teams focus on the higher order task and get to an autonomous world.
So thank you very much for the panel. Just again for everybody to wrap up here. If you look at autonomy, we are able to increase the performance, actually maintain or increase the availability, and lower the cost. There are not trade-offs by applying this technology. And I would say that the way that the world is adopting digital services and all the other capabilities, this train's not slowing down. Infrastructure is going to continue to grow. It's going to continue to get more complex. 10,000 microservices going to 35,000, whatever it is, people will not be able to manage those environments, period. We have to help augment the SRE teams to make sure that we have a tie back to the customer experience by enabling this autonomy to take hold. So thank you very much for being on the panel, and thank you for jumping.